Land of enchantment! Despite the main focus of this channel, Texas actually isn't my favorite state to go camping in. That honor belongs to New Mexico. So, over the next 2 videos, I'm going to be visiting some family and seeing what kind of adventures I can get myself into. I stopped in Santa Fe for a bit, then went hiking with some cousins in 4th of July Canyon, way south of THEYRE'S, tucked deep into the mountains. So, Albuquerque is that way, to the northwest. Las Cruces and White Sands are down there to the southwest. I am from that direction. And this is the middle of nowhere.
Those are all trees. It's not the ground. That's why they call it 4th of July Canyon. All the pops of color.
That is amazing. After that, I said goodbye to the rest of the family and headed south to see what I could find. But, as it would seem, strange things happen in the desert at night. This is White Sands. What is all this stuff? Fallout shelter, canvas bags, bottled soda, a portable crank radio, a gas mask. Did I time travel? Come on. I gotta figure out what year I'm in.
Flash, apparently official. President Kennedy died at 1 p.m.
Nah, that ain't it. Dead Kennedys isn't a thing yet.
Today's date, July 15th, 1945, just outside Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Oh, man. And so it would seem I have been thrown back in time to just before the testing of the first U.S. atomic bomb as an airman outside of White Sands in a mostly inaccurate uniform. Suppose this will come in handy then. Well, like any good content creator, it's good to stay fresh with the times. And since the times is currently 1945, today we're talking about the Manhattan Project. If you don't know, or well, you do, but you might not know some of the names behind it, the Manhattan Project was the U.S. military mission to create the world's first atomic bomb. And it worked. The atom bomb's use in World War II and its very existence at all is a moral dilemma. But it's an undeniably powerful and awesome force of nature. And it's something that my family is deeply connected to. When mankind discovered nuclear fission in 1938, the first question that anyone asked is, how can we make this explode? The U.S.'s atomic program started a year later in 1939 with the Einstein-Szilard letter, a letter from a number of highly accredited German scientists, including Albert Einstein, to the U.S. government, essentially saying, hey, the Nazis are trying to make an atom bomb. And FDR said, not if we make one first. Thus was the creation of the Manhattan Project, dubbed so because it required roughly the same amount of electricity as New York City to run, and where my actual great-grandfather, Charles Normand, entered the picture. FDR appointed this guy, Leslie Groves, to head the project, and, more importantly, this guy, J.R. Oppenheimer, to be the brains behind the operation. There were over a dozen locations across America that were vital to this project, but the 2 biggest ones by far were in New Mexico and Tennessee, both of which my family is connected to, and one of which I'm sitting in today. In late 1942, my great-grandfather, Charles Normand, who was a professor at the University of Berkeley, received a letter that the Army was interested in him. Several weeks later, him and 3 other professors boarded a train with absolutely no idea where they were going. They were not even told where they were until the train stopped in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a place where my extended family still lives today. What they didn't know at the time was that Oak Ridge, then a barely existent mountain town in northeast Tennessee, had been selected as the project's uranium-235 processing site. Almost as impressive as the bomb that it helped build, the town of Oak Ridge was truly a marvel of secrecy. Beginning in late 1942, the site was transformed nearly from the ground up, as the population grew from 3 to 75,000 over the course of the next 3 years, entirely sealed off from the world and found on no map in America. By 1943, Oak Ridge was home to two facilities that would become the powerhouse of the Manhattan Project. The X-10 reactor, only the second functioning nuclear reactor on the planet, and Y-12, responsible for the electromagnetic isotope separation of uranium-235, the nuclear fuel part of nuclear bombs. Later in 1945, a third facility, K-25, the single largest man-made building on Earth at the time, would also be added, which used gaseous diffusion to enrich uranium as part of the final push for the bomb. In efforts to keep the goals of the project a secret, the vast majority of Oak Ridge's workers in town and even in the plants themselves were not considered Army personnel, but rather simply civilians with strange jobs, the importance of which was never explained or questioned. Additionally, more so than in most military installments of the time, women played a huge role in Oak Ridge, both in the day-to-day aspects of running the unusual town and working in the plants themselves. In a famous story published after the war, a woman working in the laundry department of the Y-12 facility was given what she called a magic wand and told to scan used clothing, and discovered after the war that it was actually a Geiger counter used to scan the clothes for radiation. From late 42 all the way through the end of the war, Great Grandpa Norman was a physicist and an expert in vacuum spaces, or rather the lack of space, which according to my grandfather earned him the nickname the man who knew the most about nothing. As Oak Ridge sprung up around him, he found himself in a lead position at the Y-12 facility. However, even with the position that he held as one of the first professors to see the town almost before it existed, and with knowledge of the work that they were doing with uranium, even he barely knew what transpired at the other facilities at Oak Ridge, let alone that other project sites like Los Alamos even existed at all. In the early 50s, after the war ended, Life magazine published an article estimating that less than a few dozen people in the entire country knew the full extent of the Manhattan Project and what it was truly about. Believe it or not, barely any of the Manhattan Project's budget was actually spent on the bomb itself. Over 3/4 of it was spent refining uranium-235, which at the time was a very muddy and not quite perfected process, which is why the Y-12 facility at Oak Ridge was so massive. Although the actual construction of the bomb was proposed for Oak Ridge, Groves and Oppenheimer knew that they needed an even more secret location, which is where Los Alamos comes into play. Los Alamos was, quite literally, a boarding school in the remote desert of northwest New Mexico that Groves and Oppenheimer transformed into a command post for the function of research and the eventual construction of most of the bomb. It was far smaller than Oak Ridge, only reaching a population of about 8,000 with hardly any additional infrastructure built, as the staff simply worked and lived out of the old boarding school. One of the reasons Los Alamos was chosen as a site for the bomb construction, despite the logistical and engineering challenges, was that Oppenheimer found the scenery so beautiful that he thought it would be uplifting to the workers. By May of 1945, the design had been completed and the Y-12 facility had successfully refined enough uranium. And so, they began to search for a spot to test it. Dubbed the Trinity Site, a spot in the northern end of the White Sands Desert of New Mexico, was selected to test the first U.S. atomic bomb, and thus became the third and most important piece of the Manhattan Project. And so, they came to White Sands. Well, actually, they're coming to White Sands in about... I don't know how to use this thing. The final pieces were assembled on site, including the uranium-235 in the McDonald Ranch House, which, fun fact, actually isn't a code name like the rest of this project, but was just a ranch house in the desert that the U.S. government eminent domained and then built an atomic bomb inside of. In July of 1945, the completed bomb, now known as the Gadget, was hoisted onto a tower 100 feet in the air. Some 20 miles away, Oppenheimer, Groves, and a few others watched as the bomb was detonated. The tower was vaporized instantly, and all of the windows of the McDonald Ranch House exploded, but it didn't matter. They had succeeded. In the light of the first successful atom bomb test in the world, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man responsible for the way the world is today, is quoted to have said, "Some of us laughed, some cried, but most were silent." He then quoted a Hindu scripture, saying, "Now I am death, destroyer of worlds." I guess we all feel that in a way now. Today, the former testing site is split into a national park and an active Air Force base. Missile launches still do occasionally close Highway 70, so be careful if you're coming out here, but I believe that's the last atom bomb going off in White Sands for a while. Well, I guess as long as I'm stuck here, might as well go camping. And with that, my friends, welcome to the Valley of Fire.
Located here outside the tiny town of Carrizozo on a several thousand-year-old ground flow of hardened Malpais lava rock. The hardened lava flow itself covers a huge swath of the valley west of the town and is pretty alien in its own right, especially for an otherwise empty desert. It's completely overgrown with vegetation at this point, mostly yucca plants and prickly pear cactus, which brings me to something that I learned while I was here. Yuccas are one of my favorite plants of all time, and they're about as common as grass in New Mexico. But while I was at the Valley of Fire, I noticed these guys, what look like yuccas, but with these big, long seed stalks sticking out of the top of them. As much as I love the desert, I'm not as knowledgeable about it as I am places in Texas, just because I didn't grow up there. So I did a little research, and it turns out that these guys aren't yucca at all. They're spoon plants, which strangely enough are evolutionarily closer to lilies than they are actual yuccas. Their leaves are thinner and have spikes on them as opposed to the yucca leaves, which are slightly curved and have little hairs on them. Spoon plants have stalks that are much higher than yuccas and have seeds on top, while yucca stalks are shorter and they have flowers, which, beautifully enough, is the state flower of New Mexico.
Valley of Fire doesn't feel like the edge of the world like a lot of remote places do. It feels like the center of it. There's civilization within sight of the campground. Carrizozo is only 4 miles away. But beyond that, there's nothing. The Tularosa Basin is surrounded by white sands to the south and mountains in every other direction. Everywhere you look, you feel enclosed, cut off. There's nothing else but desert. Just the town and the valley. The valley is quiet at night. There are sounds of life, but it makes you listen for them. If you ever want to disappear completely, the Valley of Fire lies deep in the Tularosa Basin of the New Mexico desert, waiting.
Hiking through the desert. That's my life. You know, in all of my notes, I never actually could find the date that they tested the atomic bomb. You know, I think they'd be on there. I guess it might not have happened yet, but... No. Gotta go. Oh, where'd it go? I gotta get underground. Carlsbad Caverns. Perfect. Those go for miles underground. Oh, I gotta get there. Wait, I forgot the Zia. But there's a nuclear bomb going off, but it's so good. No! Will I escape total atomic annihilation and make it back to 2020? And if I do, will I ever finish this video? Tune in next week to... next week. Tune in next time featuring Carlsbad Caverns and more. I see you there. I gotta go.